We're looking for ways in which the mind sabotages us from getting our outcomes, from being successful. And we're looking for ways in which we can use the mind in order to help us to do that. And we've talked about the internal factors in the mind where we're on autopilot, and now we're looking at external things in which we live in that also constrain us and impact that. So I'm going to ask you a simple question, and I want you to write down the first 5 things that come to you. The question is this: what do you feel you can't do anything about? What do you feel you can't do anything about? Write down the first 5 things that come to you. Another way of putting this is, what do you feel you have no control over? What do you feel you have no control over? It's a really important question because so much hinges on it. Okay, so you can continue to write. What do you feel that you have no control over? What do you feel you can't do anything about? So there's 2 ways we can go through life. We can go through life as victims, or we can go through life at cause. We can either be the cause or we can be the effect. And those things that we feel we have no control over, then we are victims of those things. We become victims of circumstances, and we say it's beyond our control, we've got no control over it, and all we can do is simply adapt. We may fight it, but we've got no control over it. And all of us have things on an ongoing basis that we feel we have no control over. We feel powerless. We feel impotent. We feel that we are victims in some cases. And in any case, we're at effect. And we're at effect because we have no power, no control over the situation. Now, the opposite is to be at cause, to take control over the situation, to refuse to be a victim. And one of the things for maturing in life is to give up being a victim, stop being a victim. Now, that's easy to talk about, so what are some of the ways we go about doing it, and what are some of the things that we feel we have no control over? So one of the first things we frequently feel that we have no control over is we may feel we've got no control over our feelings, and that feelings are things that just happen to us. We even got a special word for people who can control their feelings. We call them insincere, because they can control their feelings. So we're victims then of feelings. They're things that just happen to us we have no control over. Frequently we think we're victims of thoughts, that we've got no control over them. Now, also then, when we look out there and see who are we victimized by, or what do we feel we can't do anything about, so one of the first things comes up is relationships and other people and how we're going to respond in those situations. So all of us have said at one point or another, you make me feel, or you cause me to feel, or you make me think, or you cause me to think. So the question is, can anybody make you feel something? Can anybody cause you to think something? So it's easy to say no, but when we look at our day-to-day life and the way we live our lives on a daily basis, then once again, we give our feelings and control over them to other people. We give our minds and control of them over to other people, and we're not even aware we're doing it. So if we begin to listen to the language whenever we hear ourselves, you make me feel, or you cause me to feel, then the response should be, what is it I've done that causes you to choose to feel? So what we've got to do then is, in order to move from being at effect to being at cause, from being a victim to being at cause, then we need to move from you make me feel to I choose to feel. So feelings are things we have choice over. Thoughts are things we have choice over. Instead of you make me think, it's what have you done that causes, so I ask then, what have I done that causes you to think that way? And you've got control over your thoughts, so you can choose to think differently, you can choose to feel differently. So the first thing then is, in our relationship with other people, that We think that we don't have control over our thoughts. We don't have control over our feelings. Now then, what are some other things that we feel we have no control over? So the next biggie is the environment. The environment, everything around us and surrounds us. And in the environment then, we'll say there's certain things we have no control over. We say we are victims of circumstances beyond our control. So once again, then what are we victims of, and where do we have choice in the situation? A very interesting book written by a very interesting gentleman. His name was Viktor Frankl, and he was a Jewish psychiatrist, and he was put in a concentration camp. And in the concentration camp, then he was tortured, he was shaved his head, he had no control over his body, he had basically no control over his life. And he said, well, if psychiatry is to have any meaning whatsoever, then I need to be able to be put in these circumstances and respond differently to everybody around me that I see that's accepting this and falling apart. So what is it that they can't take away from me? What is it that I have control over, and ultimately they can never take control over unless I let them have it and give it to them? And so he said, well, what they have no control over is the way and the attitude with which I will accept my fate. So my attitude is something under my control, should I choose to control it. And even though I may live under horrible circumstances, I can adopt a positive attitude in this situation. And he looked around him and saw all sorts of people that were in despair and hopelessness, and that were victims, and that were dying on a regular basis, and he was managed to survive. So even under the most heinous circumstances, we have control over the way we're going to relate to it, the attitude with which we're going to accept that. So we still have control under those conditions. Now then, we live in a world that's constantly changing. And so, as Evan is continually pointing out, and we're going to continue to point out through this seminar, is the way our mind is set up and our brain is set up is not to live in the world we're in now, but is to live in some kind of a past world. And in the past world, then change was much more irregular, and that it was less common, and in many ways we could deal with it. I read something online the other day, just the other night, I guess, on, and they had a thing on about how one of the South American civilizations had been destroyed, and it was a great mystery. What happened? It was like we've got this evidence the civilization existed up to a certain point, and then it ceased. So what in the world led to the ceasing? And so they had all sorts of speculation, and in this they said now climatological research indicated that there were two factors. There was factors of prolonged drought, and then there were monsoon rains that swamped the irrigation ditches and everything, and it basically destroyed the civilization. So they came up with changing circumstances of which they could not adapt or begin to adapt to. So human beings have the ability to adapt within certain limits. And once we move out those limits, then our adaptability becomes an issue. So what do we got to be able to do then under those circumstances? One of the things we've got to is be constantly alert to changes in the environment. Constantly alert to changes in our environment that may impact us. So it's better to be forewarned and forearmed. And so therefore, the Boy Scout motto, be prepared, as in this, as in most areas of life, is a great value. So we need to be constantly alert to signs of change. An interesting passage from The Management Myth by Richard Hames. The role of the environment or context as a partner in an emergent future means that learning about the environment has to be a significant component of any strategy-making process. In a rapidly changing environment, it becomes necessary to monitor, analyze, and synthesize data that elicit and make conscious knowledge of changes that may be the harbingers of important socioeconomic, environmental, political, or technological shifts. Information considered relevant is then integrated into the organization's unique circumstances in a way that enable the organization to design desirable strategic goals as well as the means of achieving them. Part of this process entails a critical reevaluation of the organization's explicit perceptions and experiences in order to generate confidence for action. Nothing is learned from doing something correctly. This merely confirms what we already know. It is only possible to learn from mistakes. Unfortunately, most people are designed to conceal mistakes, particularly from ourselves. As a result, we cannot learn. Confidence comes from making mistakes transparent and from taking actions to ensure that the same mistake cannot happen a second time. This confidence then becomes a crucial element in accepting collective responsibility for eventual consequences. Eric Hoffer has said, in a time of drastic change, it is the learners who inherit the future. The learned find themselves equipped to live in a world that no longer exists. The intention of adaptive strategic planning is to allow people to follow the path of the learners rather than the learned. So often then, we're caught up and living in the past and assuming the future is going to be a continuation of the past. And as long as the future is a continuation of the past, we live in a stable environment, and we can usually adapt and learn over time to be able to live in that environment. But when we've got the future not a continuation of the past, when the future is continually changing, and then we've got to be able to learn quickly. We've got to learn quickly to move into the future. And we've got to be alert for signs of change. And we've got to anticipate possible changes and come up with ways of dealing with those. And when the mind can begin to do this, then the mind can be able to move towards success. If the mind can't do this, then we're going to have a series of problems. So the things then that are then preventing us from getting our outcomes, the things that we feel we can't do anything about, the things that we are victims of, then are frequently victims of other people, victims of the environment, and then there's that favorite thing, the system. It's the system. We can't do anything about it. The system is this mythical entity we create, and then it becomes the international and the universal excuse for why we can't do anything, because the system prevents us. So one of the most important things you can begin to be very clear on and pay attention to is, what are those things you feel you can't do anything about, and what are the things you feel you can do something about? The Alcoholics Anonymous prayer says, basically, give me the courage to accept those things I can't change. Give me the strength to change the things I can, and give me the wisdom to know the difference between the two. So once again, where do we make ourselves victims? That's the first question. Where do we make ourselves victims? The first thing you got to do is give up being a victim. You got to be at cause, not at effect. You've got to take charge, and where you see yourself as a victim, then you need to be very aware. What are the things you feel that you can do nothing about or that you have no control over? Okay, the next thing is that we live, as Eben has been saying, we live in this matrix called culture. So what in the world is this thing we call culture? Eben was talking about it. Edgar Schein, who is the Harvard professor, is generally regarded to be the leading expert in the world on culture. And he says culture is this. Culture is the shared tacit assumptions of a group that it has learned in coping with external tasks and dealing with internal relationships. Although culture manifests itself in overt behaviors, rituals, artifacts, climate, and espoused values, its essence is the shared tacit assumptions. Now, the theme that continually is running through what we're talking about is awareness. Awareness. And the reason culture then is this trap is because culture is shared tacit assumptions. So what does that mean? It's things we all share. Tacit means it's not implicit. We're not aware of it. It's outside of our awareness. It's just there. And it's assumptions. And you've all seen that little anagram where you write up the word assume, and then you say assumes assumptions and make an ass, A-S-S, out of you and me. So that once again, we've got these shared assumptions and they're outside of our awareness. We simply live in the matrix of the culture. We're not aware of the tacit assumptions we share, and they form a background in everything we do. And until we bring this into awareness, until it becomes implicit rather than explicit, then we can begin to do something about it. So we need to be aware at all times. We don't, as Evan has said, we don't live in isolation, we live in a culture. We live in a matrix of shared tacit assumptions. And we need to be aware of what those are and how that's impacting us. And many of the ways it impacts us is it impacts us directly on what kinds of behavior that we consider acceptable or not. One of the products of culture is values and shared values. Ethics and morality have to do with culture. What we think is right or wrong, what we think is good or bad, are largely a function of the culture and are shaped by the culture. And these good and bad are the strange attractors that are continually pulling our mind or repelling it in different directions. And a lot of this is outside of our awareness because it's embedded in the culture and we live in the culture. And what happens is anything that's more or less constant usually slips out of our awareness. That's what about being on autopilot is all about. That's what being a machine is all about. It's like if we had to pay attention to everything, we would be on overload. So the mind is a fairly remarkable thing. So it simply deletes the things that are constant or continuous and says that's the way it is. I don't need to pay attention to it. So we're not aware of these things. They slip out of our mind. And the culture in which we're embedded is one of the things frequently we're least aware of. And so one of the first things we've got to do is then once again, the mind has to be aware of these shared tacit assumptions so that we can begin to use our brain in order to create success. Okay, there's another more insidious structure that surrounds us and engulfs us and is totally, in general, out of our awareness. It's been said there are three great mysteries in life. What is water to a fish? What is air to a bird? And what is language to a human being? We live in a matrix of language. And the way that we think and the currency of the mind is language. We are symbolic processors, which is our greatest strength and our greatest weakness. And the language in which we live and in which operates inside our head and in which we reason and think isn't something that we go meta to and are aware of. And few people stop and step back and reflect on the language and on the structure of the language and on the implications for how we are controlled by it, because it's the mechanism in which we have to think. And if in a session, a later session, I'm going to go into this in a lot more detail. But we need to understand then that language is the greatest trance there is. Each of us has language, and different cultures have different languages and communicate in different ways. And these languages then end up doing several things. They end up deleting, leaving out information. We will talk more about this. They end up generalizing. Something happens a few cases, and we assume it's always the case. And they out and out distort the world. And we need to understand the way that the language we use is a distortion of the world. And these are some of the tools that we're going to be getting to that are going to allow us to understand that. But for the moment, we need to understand that language is one of the greatest trances. And it's one of the things we're least aware of because we hear that voice in our head all the time. And that voice in our head, we're not aware that it's using a language and that language is restrictive and constraining, and that we live in that language. And whereas the fish is not aware of the water, the bird is not aware of the air, we're not aware of the language. It simply serves as the background. Okay, given this, there's some other challenges we face. So one is then that, as Evan's already talked about, that when we're not sure what to do in circumstances, we look around to see what other people do. So what Cialdini calls social proof. So that in general, and Evan talked about, some of us then basically focus inside. Some of us look to see what other people are doing. People who go inside we call internal frames of reference. People that are outside what call external frames of reference. Now, in general, as children, we're born with external frames. And what happens is we grow up, one of several things happen. We keep an external frame, but the external frame changes. So how many times did your parents tell you, what do you think the neighbors will think? What do you think the Joneses will think? What do you think our friends will think? So people are trying to live up to an image and are trying to please other people and don't want to do anything that's going to make them look bad in the eyes of other people. And the child then, at an early age, is indoctrinated by this. And then they go off to school, and what happens is that a major shift occurs. They still keep frequently their external frame, they just change the referent. So now it's no longer the parents, it's their peer group. And it's mama, mama, daddy, daddy. I want to wear the same thing all the other hip people wear. I want to listen to the same music all the hip people wear. I want to do what all the hip people do. I want to be one of the group. I want to be one of the group. So this is the external frame that's then continually then, and once again, frequently we're not aware of it. It's the substratum, the matrix. It's always there, always impacting us, and it's always what do other people think. If you've got a strong enough internal frame, you don't care what other people think or feel, and that can be a pathology too. So we need some kind of balance between these two things. Now then, also when we start with this external reference, then frequently we end up with what we call groupthink, which is we get a group of people together, and Evan talked about some of the interesting things. You put a group of people together that are homogeneous, and you get very little creativity, and everybody basically thinks the same. You need an inhomogeneous group in order to generate creative solutions. So what happens is this frequently happens in life. There is a management parable told by Jerry Harvey, who was a professor at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., in the business school. And he talks about how when he was younger, that his family, they would go visit their relatives in Abilene, Kansas. Kansas, not Texas. And so once again, they would lived on a farm outside of Abilene. And so it was before air conditioning, and it would be hot. So the coolest time of the day was the morning. So the first person goes out on the porch in the morning, and then the second person comes out, and the person says, what do you want to do today? I don't know. What do you want to do today? Well, what do you want to do? Well, do you want to go to Abilene? And the person goes, oh, you want to go to Abilene? Yeah, okay, go to Abilene. And then, so two people are there. The next person comes out. The two people sitting there saying, do you want to go to Abilene? The person goes, okay, you want to go to Abilene? Yes. So then another person comes out, and three people say, do you want to go to Abilene? And the person says, yes. So they get in a car. They drive on a hot, dusty road for 2 hours to get to Abilene. They have a terrible meal, and then they drive back for 2 hours on the hot, dusty road. By the time they get back, nobody wants to talk to anybody, and everybody just disappears. And then at the end of the evening, when temperatures cooled off and the humidity and the climate cooled down, then people once again came back out on the front porch, and they had an interesting discussion. And the discussion was, whose idea was it to go to Abilene anyway? And what did they find out? They found out nobody wanted to go to Abilene. 4 intelligent adults had spent the day doing what nobody wanted to do because nobody was willing to stand up and say, no, I don't want to do that, because everybody was trying to appease everybody else. So everybody was trying to appease everybody else. So often we find ourselves on the bus to Abilene without even being aware of it. because we don't want to stand up and say no. We figure, okay, socially, I'll simply try to go along with what the group wants and bear the consequences instead of being willing to say no. And this runs into all sorts of problems in the business world, problems in life. So frequently we find ourselves on the bus to Abilene. So, are you on the bus to Abilene? I hope not. Okay then, so in summary, what we're saying here is that what we want is to mind control, how to use your mind and brain to create success. And there's certain things that facilitate this, and there's certain things that prevent it. In order to understand the things that prevent it, we have to understand the matrix in which we're embedded. And the problem with understanding the matrix in which we're embedded is we don't see it. We don't see it because it's there constantly. We're not aware of it. Any constant signal after a while, then you begin to cancel out of conscious awareness. And that's the way the unconscious is able to operate and simplify the world. So we have to bring these things into awareness. We have to bring into awareness the things of which we're victims, that we feel we have no control and that we're not in charge of, whether it be other people, whether it be environment, whether it be then the context, whether it be the system. We've got to be aware of the culture in which we're embedded, that we're totally outside of our awareness, and we're not aware of our interaction with it and the impact it has on it and the way it helps us decide what we think is good, bad, right, wrong. We need to be aware of the language we speak and that the way that it constrains our thought process and limits the thought process. We need to be aware of our external frames and the degree we rely on social proof and external validation. And we've got to be aware of these getting on the bus to Abilene and doing what nobody wants to do. And if we can begin to be aware of these things, and awareness is the key, if we can begin to become aware of this, then we've got a chance of getting out of the matrix. We got a chance of taking the plane off of autopilot and beginning to fly it to where we want to fly it. So in order to wake up from the matrix then, you got a choice. Do you want the red pill or the blue pill? Which is it going to be? It's up to you.
Okay, a couple of quick stories you've probably heard to connect up what we're learning. A man and a woman are standing in the kitchen at Thanksgiving. The woman is preparing the ham for the whole family because they're in the house. The wife takes the ham, puts it on the counter, cuts off the ends of the ham, puts it in the tray, puts it in the oven. The husband says, "Honey, why do you cut off the ends of the ham?" The wife says, "Because that's how you cook a ham." And he goes, "That's how you cook a ham? How do you know that's how you cook ham?" She goes, "Well, that's the way Mom cooked a ham." He says, He's in the house, the family's there. So he goes over to the living room to her mother, his mother-in-law, who he loves very much. And he says, "Hey, you old bat." He says, "How come you cut off the ends of the ham when you cook the ham?" And she says, "Because that's how you cook a ham." He says, "Well, what do you mean that's how you cook a ham? Why?" And she goes, that's the way Grandma always cooked it." So at this point, he's thinking, I will figure this out. So he goes out onto the porch where Grandma is, and he says, "Hey, Grandma, how come you cut off the ends of the ham when you cook it?" And she says, "Well, back when I was a girl, we had a little tiny stove, and you couldn't fit the whole ham in there, so we cut the ends off to fit it in." The next story that I like. You take 5 apes, and you put them in a cage, and you put one of those little stair-stepping devices that you can use to reach up and get something, and just hanging from the ceiling, you put a bunch of bananas. so that you have to walk up onto the stair-step platform to get to the bananas. Every time an ape goes over and sets 1 foot on the platform, you take a big fire hose and you spray all the apes with water, which they do not enjoy. After several of these experiences, and after several brave apes looking at the bananas think, okay, I'm going to try it, what happens? Every time one of the apes goes near the steps, the other apes come and grab it and beat the shit out of it. Okay? But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is you take one of the 5 apes out of the cage and you bring a new ape and you put it in the cage. Now, what's the new ape going to do? Immediately go for the bananas. And what do the other 4 apes do? Beat it up. Now, it doesn't know what the hell's going on here. I mean, it's like, I'm just trying to have some bananas, right? Shocking. Then you take another one of the original apes out and you introduce a new ape. And when it goes over near the steps, what happens? Everyone beats them up. You take them out one by one and replace them over time. And eventually you've got 5 new apes, none of whom ever got sprayed with water. And what happens when any of them goes near the steps? Everyone beats them up. Am I me or am I we? One of the paradoxes that we'll be talking about more in this program, but one of the paradoxes that we need to recognize in life right now is that the directionality of this issue is that as individuals, we're becoming more autonomous and more powerful and more developed. Okay? More autonomous. We have more agency and more control, more options than we've ever had. And as a group, we're becoming more connected and more interdependent and more of a we than ever before. So these 2 directions are integrating, right? We're becoming more individual and more group simultaneously. Both of them are evolving and transforming and integrating. All right, good. Look over the notes from this section that you've taken, your insights. Find the one insight that you feel was the most relevant. Okay, find the one insight that you feel about how the process of weeing is influencing your mind, influencing your success, your results. Good, just look over your notes. Find that one insight. You're about to use it in this exercise. Number 4, is that right? Okay, good. On this exercise, which actually is the exact same design as the last one, 6 challenges. Write the number 4 in the lower right corner. Okay. Write 4 in the lower right corner to number the chronology. Now, as you've noticed, we're playing a game here. The game is called Refine and Integrate. Refine and integrate. We're iterating and we're taking the information that we've learned and we're putting it back into the system. Okay, we're using it as feedback. We're truly learning and evolving right here. So you're going to take exercise number 3, and you're going to migrate your challenges. You're going to refine and clarify, and you're going to integrate what you've learned in this section. Some of the challenges from your last exercise may not make it. You might look at them and realize, oh, you know what? Because I'm thinking about this challenge in a little bit more holistic way, and because I'm thinking on a higher level, this is going to address that other challenge. You might combine two of them into one. You may have a new one come up. You may realize, oh, I forgot all about this one, or gosh, I didn't realize that the challenge that I didn't think was that big of a deal is actually a big deal, and it's being kind of influenced by this weeing process. Okay? You make the rules, but let's migrate all of our challenges into this new exercise, and let's integrate what we've learned from weeing into our statement of our challenges. Okay? Again, ideally, 3 to 5 words, maybe 7 max. Things are getting a little more complex here as we add layers, so they may be getting a little bit longer. Do your best to be specific, and do your best to integrate and interleave the material that you've just been made aware of, that you've just been able to see in your own life, into your biggest challenges. Okay, the objective is to have at least one in each of the 6 boxes. At least one. Okay, 2 is fine. Bruce? An example of?
Integrating the weeing into this. I mean, I get it conceptually, but an example of blend.
Okay. So I'll just keep going with the direction that I went with before, which is, so let's say in the last exercise here, I went and I saw how my bias toward instant gratification is leading me to eat a bunch of food that is the challenge when I want to lose my 30 pounds of fat, right? So here, I may notice, oh, I'm really, really being influenced by others. And what always happens is I'm on my diet and I'm doing a good job for a couple of days, and then I go to lunch with a bunch of my friends, and for some reason, everyone's eating, and that just blows it, right? So my challenge now becomes more about behaving in a way that supports me with friends. So maybe I need to change my group behavior around eating. Maybe I need to talk to my friends so that when we go out, I ask them to support me. Okay, so it's like a totally different level of influence. The challenge level is moving to a we level. Does that help? Great. Thank you for the question. Yep.
Question, it's not on topic. When's a good time to ask? End of the day?
Later. Good question. So remember, each of these should change. It should tweak, modify. They're all evolving. We're taking another step back and we're integrating another level of information, another level of perspective, another level of theory and knowledge, and another level of practicality, right? Should be integrated into all of these. Good, go. Okay, who had an insight? Hasn't shared yet. Be willing to share. Got one here. Oh, the shiny pink tops are just confusing me. Steph, all right. And this guy right here.
My name's Tony. I'm from Santa Monica. The insight I had was in 4 quadrants, and it had to do with 2 of the levels, the logical and emotional. To give a little background on my situation, I had what I perceived as a business failure. But it was more like a stumbling block, but I perceived it as a failure and resulted in a degradation in confidence. And that started moving throughout all these levels in the 4 quadrants. And what it resulted in is in a constant looping of this emotional need to fix it, so to gain the confidence back. And then I looped into logical, how do I fix this thing? But it was all trying to fix it at the level the problem occurred. And it just wasn't working. So at lunch, I just kind of threw out some of my concepts, my teachings, and it was well received. And in that instant, it started like a circular domino effect. It started taking care of the confidence problems, and it started taking care of the not putting it out there problems, which is in the logical internal, and then it moved to the emotional external, and I got a validation that I am smart and I know what I'm talking about. And then it moved to the emotional internal, which all started with like, hey, I don't have this confidence. And so it all kind of just, by putting it out there and seeing it well received, it kind of took care of all those things in an integrated piece.
Interesting. So you got to see how one move could affect multiple things that affected multiple things.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Great, great insight.
Hi, I'm Matt from Pacific Palisades, and I realize this is partly judgmental yet partly observational, but I've realized it's been a challenge for me that I seem to be constantly surrounded by idiots. And I know that's partially on the outside world that also creates an emotional response in the inside world. So the insight that I got is that I still believe I'm surrounded by idiots, but now I know that I'm one of them.
Did you phrase your challenge differently as a result of knowing that you were one of them?
The phrase was still, I'm surrounded by idiots, but now I know I'm one of them.
Okay, interesting. Well, profound insight. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Steph. I live in Newport Beach. It's right south of here. So, I'm having this experience like there's a 2.0 earthquake going on. Like, so it's a little shaky still. It's probably why my voice is quavering, because it's like I've been having this feeling of my two paradigms, or like your paradigm and my paradigm of living, are now having tea together. And one of them is that we're either going to become friends, or one's going to win, or it's like, we're not sure.
I got you right where I want you now.
We're not sure yet.
Perfect.
Okay, I feel better now that I said that. Whew. So, yeah.
That was incredible. That was like an instant de-quivering.
It was like, it was either I say that or I was going to break down and cry, so whew, I got a hold now. Okay, so, I had a really hard time with this, and I picked Todd as my partner because I knew he would help me move it in my brain right way. And what I came to is I realized two really big things. One was in the exercise before this, I was having, my big challenge that I chose to talk about with my partner was that I'm having this experience if I want to fire some of my friends because it's too painful to be in relationship with them. And what I realized is, well, over lunch and through this exercise, is that they're playing the victim role, and I despise that role. It's like neediness sort of makes me crazy. And so I realized that I have a breadcrumb of that neediness, victimness, and it's pulling it up, and that's the pain, is being near them, is having to make me look at my own victimness and my own neediness. You know, is this okay what I'm saying? Because there's a little bit more.
Are you trying to victimize me?
No. Oh, so this is my realization. So now I added on to my other big challenge was, and it sounds ridiculous, but I can't go to bed early. No matter what I try, I'm up till 1 a.m. doing something or nothing. And I realized I've been saying I can't go to bed unless Todd goes to bed. Like, otherwise he'll wake me up, or I'll just lay there staring at the ceiling, so I might as well be staring at something else. And so I've not been going to bed, and it's gotten to the point where it's painful, like I'm tired, you know. And he was another problem we were having, where if he gets to be a poopy pants, then I shouldn't have to be the one that has to be non-poopy pants, so I'm just a snappy back. And I realized that in both those instances,
I'm still not following you on the poopy pants part.
it's a nicer word than other words you could use. Like,
That's a nicer word? What could you just get?
okay, so the point is that I realized I was giving away my control and I was using it as an excuse. Like, I'm making up excuses so that I don't have to be responsible for my life.
Oh, so in other words, you're saying he's controlling me here instead of taking control of your life?
Sort of indirectly, yes.
But indirectly, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So I was playing the full-on victim role, like bringing it all around, and now I don't have to fire my friends, and I can take responsibility, and I can take actions in all these areas and just say, hey, here's how I choose our relationships to be. Are you on board or not? So.
Well, if you got a bunch of victim friends, you probably do want to fire them, but we'll get to that in the next section.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Steph. Maybe not fire them, just put them on a very part-time projects. Very part-time, project-based, results only. Okay, good work. Good work. We've got a little bit more kind of tough going to go, okay? But we're all going to make it. Okay, you feel like you're making progress? Yes. All right, good. Give someone a high five. Give someone a high five. All right, good.